Peter, the writer-director of Firebird. And how did this actually start? I guess it's almost 11 years ago now that the story found me through a friend at Berlinale who was approached and knew that I was actually looking for a story to turn into my first feature. And then I read it over a weekend at home, cried, and felt like I have to turn this amazing, sad, tragic, and at the same time so beautiful human story into a film. But I hadn't written anything before, so then I started to learn how to write. And after, I think, a couple of years, I was like, okay, this is now good. And then was introduced to Tom by I guess the producer from LA. And she was like, wow, you have to meet this young actor who would be perfect to play Sergey. And it was here in London, Christmas 2014, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we shot 2 scenes, foremost to prove to financiers that I could direct the film. And then you started making some fun comments.
Yeah, I guess I just like really felt and saw the potential in the story in the film, and really how it could be opened up to like a wider audience. And yeah, I started making some suggestions on how like the dialogue could be improved, and then some more kind of like structural notes, and then we ended up pretty much rewriting for about 2.5 years. Not full time, but it was definitely full time in probably the last year before we started casting it, right?
Yeah, speaking of that, actually, it was interesting because when we first met, it was like clear that, okay, here's Sergey, like the same some kind of quality that you have, that Sergey has. I think this warmth and openness, and this feeling of subtle nuances.
I thought it was just really good acting.
Exactly. And then we actually started casting. We did a casting call. We actually decided that we really want to have the best possible person to play Oleg. To play Roman, sorry, and also Luisa. Got about 2,500 submissions.
Or for like all of the principal parts.
Yeah.
So like Volodya and the Air Force Base Commander and KGB Major and Luisa and Roman.
KGB Major actually we had from the original concept shoot. He was like amazing. He's like an amazing actor actually as well. Marcus. And then we sat through a few hundred auditions, right? So casting director over months and months, and didn't really find the right one.
Yeah, we were looking here in London and then sort of throughout Europe, and then we went to Russia actually and started like casting even there. And we saw a whole host of very, very, very talented actors like all across those places, but yeah, it was really in Russia that we really started to find what we were looking for, right?
Yeah, Oleg walked in one day and it was like, okay, cool, that's Roman. Except he didn't really speak much English, being a Ukrainian actor actually. And sadly, at the moment, in Kiev, defending his country and his city from this pretty awful and saddening war. He can't even join us here in London next week for the premiere, which is really mad, honestly. Almost like surrealistic, unbelievable. But going back to a more positive subject, yeah, actually, what was it in the story that really got you? Like, why did you decide to put so much time and years of work into
I think for me there were just like so many different elements which were fulfilling. Like it was the Cold War and the kind of potential that I saw in sort of it being more of a kind of thriller action as well as a deep sort of soulful connection story. And it's kind of like that merging of those two. I was like, I really loved the original story that you had begun writing, and then like sort of saw how we could like open it up so much and make it like, you know, much more like accessible and thrilling in places. And but I think, you know, through and through it was like the love story, which is like it's two people who do everything to be together. I just find so inspiring as a piece of work, to like explore in such an extraordinary background as well. I think, like, you know, there's been a lot of films that have been, you know, very well made, which are about same sex relationships, but actually in this sort of a background, like in a kind of like active Air Force base, I think it really had some kind of like more resonant ambience for me. And the fact that Sergey, you know, wanted to be an actor, and I could really resonate with that journey as well. And yeah, I think that the further we went on into the story and the further we went on to the research and the writing and getting to go to Russia, which I'd never even been to Russia before, was a very like exotic sort of like possibility. And, you know, we first met Sergey there in 2016, and it was actually the same point that actually the military day parades were going on. And it was extraordinary to see this almost like performance of like tanks and soldiers and missiles and sort of rolling through the streets. And it's this really, really extraordinary sort of show of force. But it really actually was an amazing way of actually understanding what the military means there, and actually like the rigidity of it, and the uniforms, and, you know, and the illusion of it all. Well, it was so good research.
This whole country is basically still stuck in the Second World War and using it like twice a year as a propaganda machine, really, to like somehow take the attention away from the suffering, of the poorness, and the problems actually that are facing there. It's interesting because there's so much parallel to what's going on now in the world, and what was going on in the 70s, because the story actually takes place in occupied Estonia. As we all know, that in the Second World War, the Soviet Red Army came to liberate the people of Estonia, who were all so willingly waiting to be liberated. Kind of like Ukrainians are at the moment, all waiting for Russians to liberate them. I always remember my grandparents talking about having grown up, obviously, in that country, and still remembering bits of the Soviet occupation when I was a young boy. It's kind of interesting, actually, because my grandmother always spoke about it very, very angrily. Or both of my granddads actually got sent to Siberia by the Russian occupiers. So a lot of people, tens of thousands actually, fled by fishing boats, those who could. I think my dad said when they got to the beach, there were no fishing boats left anymore, so we escaped. So it's interesting that today somehow all of this memories coming up, like, and all these traumas that have been through the generations. and I was like being pretty pretty stuck by this what's going on. But coming back to the film again, it's interesting. It's like you write something and you do something, and then like the world just changes so much. You see like totally new perspectives. But for me, it was really really actually personal story, because our summer house was just a few miles from the Air Force base, and I actually remember riding the bike as a small, I don't know, maybe plus minus 10-year-old kid was my best friend, and falling off the bikes as these two Soviet jets would do a low pass at maybe 150 feet above the ground. It's like pretty mad to imagine that this kind of a love story could have existed there at that base, and I think that's what really drew me in. That I was like, wow, is this fact or fiction? That was it even possible? It seemed almost unbelievable that a conscript, a private, could fall in love with a fighter pilot in that time and place, where you ended up in 5 years of hard labor in Siberia. It was found out, and then we started doing research. Right? We spoke to some people under the condition of anonymity who were in their late 60s and serving in the Soviet army in the 70s and having same-sex relationships, either with conscripts or others. And it's kind of opened up this whole subculture, which I was like, wow, like that life has always gone on and happened. Right?
Mm.
It's kind of like amazingly positive actually to realize this. That people have always loved, and even in the face of biggest danger, have followed their feelings and somehow managed and survived.
Yeah, I think that's like the thing that I really hope people take away from the film, is to love a little bit harder and like more courageously, and will follow their heart a little bit more, and also just realize that actually how much freedom really is in the world, in many places, and actually also how much progression there is still to be made.
Yeah, that's the most amazing thing, like realizing how much there is still to be done, for the simple fact that everybody could live their life as they wish. That there would be no government trying to impose laws, and I mean some countries still madly death penalties on whom you can and cannot love. I honestly don't actually understand even this new law which Florida just passed. Like when it was in the internet, it was like
Unbelievable.
I thought it was fake news at first. I really couldn't believe that the U.S. state legislature in the year 2022 would do laws similar to Russia. It's mad.
Yeah, and then there's been the interesting kind of backlash of people saying like, why would I go and watch a Russian film right now? That's been really interesting to deal with. And this film is not remotely financed by Russia, and
zero.
And it has been effectively banned in Russia at the Moscow International Film Festival. They silenced the film, right? And they, basically were told to remove it by the state prosecution office when they got like letters sent to them. They had protesters outside the cinema saying "Stop homosexual propaganda," and 93 press articles written, 92 of them inherently negative about how awful the film was and how much it's a punch in the face to the Russian soldier. I think we got an Estonian, a Brit, and a Ukrainian shame the Moscow International Film Festival. So yeah, that's definitely one put on the pinboard.
Yeah, and then we were actually the opening night film also last autumn at Russia's oldest LGBT film festival, Side by Side, which has run for 16 years, and that was also pretty mad. The Q&A had to be interrupted because of bot attacks on YouTube Live, and actually the film couldn't be screened on the festival servers because the Russian government, some kind of office, took down the servers before the festival started. So, funnily enough, the festival was using Ukrainian servers to show LGBT films in Russia at the time. Yeah, we've had an interesting history, but then again, an amazing history at the other 55 festivals that we've been to. I think right after that, our North American premiere was at Frameline at the end of June, and that was pretty amazing actually. The first in-person screening we did after the pandemic.
So what has been the funniest experience during the making of this film for you?
The funnest experience, I think.
Funniest.
Felt like the most fun was definitely composing. Well, not composing, but let's say being in studio for over a week together with our composer in Warsaw. The funniest, well,
because it was so much fun, right?
It was so much work, actually. I mean, it was so much fun work, but I think actually there were so many moments of just like surreal moments of sitting in the iconic concert hall of the Prague Philharmonics while the symphony orchestra was recording the score, which we actually recorded the whole score live. It was a full symphony orchestra in one day to give it this 70s, 80s feel. Or I think it's still the accident sequence, like when we did this mad night shoot in the middle of a thunderstorms, which obviously added like perfect feeling to the scene. It was a perfect timing.
Now, actually, break down the scene is me like basically running around with a drain pipe and pushing a drain pipe up, and it looks like in a final cut, like wow, like this it all kind of came together and it's all one piece. And actually, it's me and one other guy in the middle of an airfield holding a drain pipe, and one of the costume departments spraying water from a squeezy bottle like onto my face. So that's like the workings of the film. I think my funniest memory actually is our first day of shooting actually in the sea. And again, our costume department having to literally ladle hot water down my pants and over my body to keep me warm, which was really fun, and nothing quite like that to break the ice.
Actually, those costumes and the authenticity bit, I think, is one that brought a couple of memories. First of all, remember when we were shooting the Zverev questioning Sergey scene in front of the barracks, and suddenly we had to stop because this old man came out from the doorway behind us, and obviously the first AD or second AD went immediately to try to get him out of the shot, and he had a photo album, and apparently he was living on the second floor of the house, and he had been a major in the Soviet Air Force, and he came because he saw from his window, he came with his photos, and we looked at his photo when he was young and looked at Zverev's costume, and they were pretty much identical. It was like, wow, the costume department really did an amazing job. They hand made all of these hundreds of costumes, like every single costume in the film, meaning all the military costumes, all the military uniforms are made specifically because we couldn't rent late 70s military uniforms from anywhere for the Soviet Air Force. So we could have 60s, we could have 80s, but it was not right. It had to be from the right time period to really have the authenticity.
And the boots were so uncomfortable. These like long boots like came from Poland. They were just like vile, but like so good at getting into the character. Like all the uniforms, particularly like the daily uniforms, were just like rough and just like, yeah, you go, all right, fine, I'll crawl through mud wearing that. So I guess that's really the point. Yeah.
Get a feeling of what it wasn't much fun.
No, I think there's actually been like a number of people who we've interviewed who actually said they actually won't talk about their time during the Soviet conscription because it was just so traumatic. Not people who were even part of, who were sort of embarking on same-sex relationships, like people who were just so traumatized by actually being through that 2 years that they won't talk about it.
But it was amazing. It was amazing meeting with Sergey actually, and knowing what he had gone for in life, and seeing how full of love and compassion he still was, and how like he asked us after these days of hours of recording interviews with him that please make this film about love, not politics.
Yeah, and that's what we did. That's pretty much what we did all along the way. Like when it came to so many decisions, it was like, okay, let's put it through that filter.
Yeah, quite an amazing process of also self-growth, and I have to mention actually one other thing that came to mind: the pretty surreal trip that we did again, second time to Moscow, and then on to the countryside just before we started shooting. Sergey passed away, and we actually attended his funeral, and I think it was amazing to have the chance to actually ask him about what it was like, and what food they ate with Roman and what music they would listen to, and it was I think even more surreal to send him on his journey to the other side.
Yeah, it's probably like one of my most surreal moments of making this film was standing in that church, realizing that this is the person's life and legacy that we were writing and leaving, and I was going to play, and yeah, it got pretty intense.
And his last wish actually was that he wanted to be at the premiere in London.
Yeah.
We'll make that wish happen. A very personal story to tell, and I think it's very important to tell these stories. Hopefully, some people will get a new perspective on life, and maybe understand better that love is love. Why can't we all just live happily together and let others live and love as they wish?
Yeah, it's just so baffling how like we're turning tables back or clocks backwards in so many places now, in Hungary and in Florida and lots of places where
Poland.
Anti-humanistic laws are coming back in. But I think this film will really help at least like a few people just like feel a little bit more and understand a little bit more. And actually, I think probably some of my favorite things that people have written to me actually about seeing the film, having experienced the film, is that if they're not a member of the LGBTQIA+ community, they will now treat people with a greater respect as a result of seeing love represented like that. And that was, I think, the creative intention that I certainly had. I think you did too, about wanting to show universality of the love, not a love between particular sexes or particular genders, but actually about kind of going, this is what love feels like, right? Maybe we should stop there.
Probably a really good place to stop. Whereas we could do another half.
Beautiful, guys. Oh my god, that was absolutely like surreal. I had chills towards the end of it, especially talking about like Sergey's like legacy and like his like last wishes for the film and experience of everything. It was just beautiful. So I want to thank you guys again for taking the time to meet with me, and also just holistically speaking, like working on this whole project with Oda. We're so excited to get this into fruition. I'm going to be working on the text over the next like 5 or 6 days or so. We'll send it to both you guys' way. We'll have you and your teams like read over it. You're welcome to make any edits, add anything, take away anything. And we're excited to get this piece live. I think the goal is to get it up by the premiere date, which I think is April 29th, right?
Yep, in the US, yeah.
In the US, right. So that is the goal that we're going to be sticking with. But yeah, we'll keep you guys posted. And of course, in the meantime, if you have any questions for me or for Oda, don't hesitate to reach out.
Cool, for sure.
Did you receive, by the way, a link to this making of the little 45-minute documentary piece?
Oh yes, I think I did receive that. I haven't actually watched it yet, but it's on my to-do list for Sunday actually. So I'm really excited to see it.
Yeah, it's probably good to have a little browse, since we might have missed some things out